Let's turn our attention back to what's happening in Liverpool, the Labour Party conference, of course. And we were hearing that Ed Miliband, Labour leader, will today talk about a quiet crisis which is affecting the silent, law-abiding majority, and he'll promise to do more to help those who he says follow society's rules.
What might that involve? Well, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, joins us now from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Good morning, Ms Cooper. It's something that we'll talk about in a second. I thought I'd better ask you first, though, about BAE Systems. 3,000 jobs we're hearing to go there. More details coming out this morning. It is, as the unions call it, a hammer blow for that part of the industry. Can anything be done about it?
Well, I think it's devastating because it's, this is high-skilled jobs in Yorkshire and Lancashire, and I think people will be very worried about this news. I think what this really shows is the irresponsibility of having the scale of the public sector cuts that we've been seeing at a time when the private sector is just not growing. And so you haven't got a whole series of private sector jobs, high-skilled jobs across the north for people to go into if they lose their jobs at BAE. So, I think the government does really need to respond to this and say what they're going to do about it.
Does this, in a sense, add to the quiet crisis that we mentioned a minute ago? I know it's more about law and order than anything else, but what do you think?
I think it does because, we're talking to people all the time who are really worried about their jobs. They're worried about the cost of living. They're seeing the prices go up. They're worried about whether or not their children are going to be able to go to university. They're worried about the cost of tuition fees. They're worried about the cost of things in the shops. So I think people are feeling under real pressure. And there is another way. There is a better way out of the global financial crisis that we've seen to respond to this that doesn't have, youth unemployment being pushed back up at the pace at which the government is doing this. That's the sort of thing Ed will be talking about today, but also, why we should be doing more, I think, to help people in the middle who are feeling really squeezed.
Ed Miliband also talking about ending what he calls the fast buck culture. Wasn't that culture created under the years of Labour government when there was very little regulation of the banks, for instance, and money was just available for everybody? You made that, didn't you?
No, I don't think so. I think it's true that we didn't toughen up regulation of the banking system strongly enough. We did, in fact, introduce stronger regulation, I think, soon after the '97 election, but didn't go anywhere far enough, given the global problems that we faced. But, you compare back to the sort of, the laissez-faire approach that Margaret Thatcher used to take in the 1980s, and the problems that we're seeing today with the government not seeming to be concerned about what's happening at BAE. I think you have to be concerned. You have to be concerned about what's happening in the economy, and the government has a responsibility towards hard-working people across the country, whether that's taking action on the banks, stopping the irresponsible behaviour that we saw in the banking system, but also just doing more to help people who, they just want to work, they want to get a job, they want to be able to support their families. They're finding it hard to do it at the moment.
The difficulty for you, though, and your other party colleagues, is that people seem to prefer the Conservatives' way of doing it. Comrade's poll released last night puts the Tories in front of Labour for the first time since last October, and fewer than 1 in 4 people sees Ed Miliband as a credible future Prime Minister.
Well, I think if you look overall at the polls, what they show is that Labour has made a lot of progress since the general election. And that was a bad election defeat for us, and we have to listen as a result of that. We have come a long way since then, setting out alternatives, showing that, the economy's got to grow in order for us to be able to do any of these things. And under, this Tory-led government, the economy is flatlining. It's deeply risky. I think Ed Miliband is doing a really good job at setting out why, Labour wants to help families who are feeling squeezed in the middle, the kinds of things he was talking about in terms of cutting tuition fees this weekend.
If you're making so much progress, how is it you've just fallen behind the Conservatives for the first time in a year?
Well, I think we will keep on making progress. I think, polls will say different things from one day to the next, from one week to the next. I think overall, if you look at what's happening, we are making progress, but we're very clear that we've still got a way to go. We've still got more work to do, and we'll be doing that work, listening to people around the country, to what they're saying that they're worried about.
Right.
We've had a lot of debates here at conference about childcare, the huge pressures on women, because childcare support's being cut. That means they can't go to work. That means they're losing their financial support. That's devastating for their families.
You're the Shadow Home Secretary. The first elections for police and crime commissioners due to take place in November. Talk at the party of boycotting those elections. Is that an idea that you support?
Well, that's not what we've been proposing, but we do obviously have to look at what will happen now because the legislation has only just gone through. I do think there is a problem here because we're talking about elections for people who don't necessarily have policing experience being elected to have considerable power over the police at a cost of over £100 million at a time when you could spend that money on police constables instead, on more police, on thousands more police on the streets, and instead what the government's doing is cutting 16,000 police officers at the same time as introducing elected crime commissioners. I think that's the wrong priority.
Right. Just to be clear then, as Shadow Home Secretary, you're not going to boycott those elections in November?
That's not what we've been proposing, but the Labour Party will have to consider how we respond because the legislation has just gone through Parliament. So we'll be thinking about the best way in which to respond and the best way to do that. But I think at the moment what people want to know is not about crime commissioners. What they actually want to know about is the police cutting 16,000 police officers right now, which is what the government is doing, not what crime commissioners are doing, what the government is doing. It's deeply, deeply irresponsible, taking risks with people's safety, risks with people's security as well.
Yvette Cooper, thanks very much.